Isn't that awesome? And if you're ever interested in doing that, you can always ask to volunteer. All right, so we've been in this series called Skins. And remember we talked about how skins are, you guys know this better than a lot of people that are older than you. Skins are like costumes, right? And we wear different costumes or we wear different skins depending upon the situation. So sometimes we, like when you play video games, you might need strength or speed or toughness, you know, something like that, right? So you wear different skins. And so the first week we talked about the first skin, and what we've been talking about is how differently we can share the gospel, right? So there's different situations that we might be in that we have to share it differently. So the first skin is right up here. Mr. Scott and I talked about using the Bible. Using the Bible, so that was our pig skin. Using the Bible to tell people about Jesus. And then last week, Mr. Scott talked about using culture, using things like sports or movies or something like that to be able to share and find common ground, right? Well, this week, we're talking about a third skin, and the third skin, you remember this guy? Yeah, it's Rico. In fact, I thought there was a Rico sighting. Rico's not in here yet. And yeah, don't forget Clark, right? Clark's in there too, right? And so we're going to be talking today about a different skin that Rico has, and we saw at SBO. Okay, but before we do that, I want to ask you a question. Think about this for a second. What do you want to be a master in? Like really, really good at? Like nobody's better than you. Go ahead. Basketball? Driving NASCARs? Ninja? Go ahead. Football? Soccer? Right? So there's lots of different things that we can decide that we want. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Acting. All right. So there's lots of different things we can be masters of, right? In fact, if you wanted to be a master chef, you would practice and you would become, and they have a special name for that, a chef de cuisine, right? Or executive chef. If you wanted to be a master in kung fu, do you know what you'd be called? Sensei's one name for it. You guys actually know this name. In Kung Fu Panda, what was the little guy's name? Shifu. Shifu. You could become a Shifu, right? Well, here's the thing. We can all think about what we want to become and we want to be good at, but do you know this? You are already a master of something. Do you know what that is? You're a master in Jesus? Everybody, give me a drum roll. You are a master of you. Of you. You have, quiet down guys. You have your own story. Right? So we're gonna see some different examples today. We're gonna look at Paul and Rico just to illustrate to you that you are a master of your own story. So your parents might know a lot about you, but did they know what you're thinking right now? Do you know what you're thinking right now? Most of you do, right? Right? You know everything about you because it's you, right? So let's look at Paul and how Paul used his story to start sharing about Jesus. So we find that in Acts 22, and when we see it in Acts 22, Paul was being beaten up and he was being arrested, and we talked about this before. The guards were taking him up the stairs, and he says to the guard, "Hey, do you mind if I say a few things to the crowd?" And the guard's like, "Okay, go ahead." And Paul starts telling a story. Now, who knows Paul's story better than Paul? Right? Paul starts sharing his story. And so he starts telling people, "Hey, listen to me, in my own defense." And he starts telling a story about who he is, where he was born, how he was educated, right? And who educated him. And then he starts talking about how he became very zealous to honor God. And as it continues in verse 6, it talks about how he started punishing people, right? So he actually started focusing on people that were following the way, and that was Jesus. Jesus is the way, right? He would arrest them, he would persecute them, sometimes he killed them, he would chain them, all kinds of stuff. In fact, if you remember, you saw this during SBO, right? So let's look back at some pictures of SBO. SBO, remember we met Paul. And you know what? Remember the day he wasn't a nice dude? He was really mad. Right? He was persecuting, he was stoning people. He was watching while his helpers stoned people. Right? And then there's Rico. Right? So Paul, here's the thing. Paul is telling his own story, and there's 3 parts, and all 3 are so important. There's the before he met Jesus, there's the meeting of Jesus, and then it's the how his life changed after meeting Jesus. So before Jesus, he was not a nice dude at all. At all. He's not somebody that you and I would want to hang out with. Right? He was persecuting people who were after the name and fame of Jesus. And then he tells the story about meeting Jesus. And check this out. This is fun. Imagine this happening to you. So as this verse tells, it tells the story. Paul is with his people, and they're on the road to Damascus. They're going to a city, and the reason they're going to a city is to arrest followers of Jesus, to persecute them, arrest them, take them back to Jerusalem, and put them in jail. It's around noon, and then all of a sudden, boom. This bright light shines in his eyes, and it's so bright. It's at noon. Is it dark at noon, or is it light at noon? It's light. Imagine a light being so bright, it is brighter than the sun. I can withstand it. Right? And I want to make sure I turn it off. And it blinds him. So then Paul, he's blinded by this light that's around noon, very bright light, and he hears this voice. And here's what's interesting about this. I think this is really cool about the story too. The story, Paul hears a voice. The voice says, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Why are you persecuting? Now, everybody else that's with him, they can't hear him. They don't hear the voice. Jesus is asking Paul, why are you persecuting me? Right? And he says, well, who is this? Who are you? And he says, I am Jesus the Nazarene, the one you are persecuting me. And as it continues, he's like, well, what do you want me to do, Lord? You know, what should I do, Lord? And Jesus tells him, I want you to go to Damascus, and there you'll be told everything that you need to know. So, on this road, he's blinded. His helpers, the people he's with, help him up. They take him to Damascus, right? So they get to Damascus, and then it gets even more crazy because you should remember this story. Do you remember the guy's name that God told to give his sight back? Okay, we'll remind you. Then he goes to Damascus, and a man named Ananias, who lived there. Ananias was a follower of God. He was so godly, right? And God says, hey, Ananias, go give Paul his sight back. And Ananias is like, what? He's persecuting people like me. Why in the world would I do that? But Ananias follows God. And so he goes and he gives Paul his sight back. And then he told me, the God of our ancestors has chosen you God chose Paul, has chosen you, for you are to be his witnesses, telling everyone what you have seen and what you have heard. What are you waiting for? SBO, right? What are you waiting for? So he's told, he's given his sight back, and he's told, go tell everybody your story. Right? So if we go back to SBO, you can remember that we saw this play out, right? So now Paul is in chains, and look at him hold his chains there, and he's smiling, he's happy. Why? Because he's met Jesus. Before Jesus, he was an angry guy. Then he met Jesus, and now he's on mission for Jesus, right? So let's get back to Rico. Who was Rico? Yeah, the guy with the funky mustache, right? And he was a trained space explorer, right? And he was on a mission, but he met Paul. And so he met Paul, and he started listening to Paul. Do you remember? I remember it like it was yesterday. Do you remember on Thursday of SBO? What happens when Rico's alarm goes off? He has to go back, right? What happened on Thursday? He didn't go back. See, Paul's story changed Rico. And Rico started listening. And he wanted to learn more about this Jesus that Paul kept on talking about. Now, Rico, he was going to grow old, right? But he had to make a decision. And we all have to make that decision for ourselves. Rico made the decision to stay and accept Jesus. See, Jesus changes our life. He changes our life. And the thing is, we all have our own story as to how God changes our life. So you're a master in something. You're a master in the most important thing. In your story about how God changed your life. Right? So, just to wrap up a little bit, we know that we can use different pieces to share Jesus. So, if somebody doesn't believe the Bible at all, if they don't believe the Bible, then do you use the Bible to try to teach them about Jesus? I mean, can you open it up and say, well, no, read it anyway? No, they'd say, no, I don't believe that. Right? We have to use different skins depending upon the situation we're in. And the skin today that we've learned about is that you can share your story. Because, can they not believe your story? No, it's yours. It's your story. It's your walk. And you're the master in it. Right? So you can use your story. And then you can pray that God will help you understand which skin you should use in the different situations that you're placed in. All right? So every month, we've been talking about, every month we have a different challenge here at Grace. And this month, where the challenge is to write out our story. Who's the best author to write our story? Can you write my story? No. But you can write your own, right? You can write out your story. Because we all have a story, just like Paul, just like Rico. Right? Now, what is the story about? It's about Jesus. And so, remember there's a before, there's a meeting Jesus, accepting him, and then an after, where Jesus starts directing our life. So, for you, it's about the ABCs, right? So, how many in here have accepted Jesus? You have a Jesus story, right? How many in here are thinking about it? Yeah, thinking about it? That's good. Guess what? You have a story too. You're right in the middle of it. And so all you have to do is the ABCs. You admit that you're a sinner. And we talk about that a lot. We do things that we shouldn't do, or we don't do things that we should. And so we admit, I'm not perfect, God. I do things wrong. I do things that I'm not proud of. And then you believe that Jesus came. He died on a cross for your sins, and he rose again. So that way, And I talked about this last time I was up here. When God looks at us and we put on our Jesus skin, he sees Jesus' righteousness. He doesn't see us. He sees Jesus' sinful life. And then we call on the Lord to direct the rest of our life. So it's the ABCs: admit, believe, and call. All right? So if you haven't made that decision, please talk to your teachers. You can talk to me. You can talk to Miss Kelsey, Miss Marissa. You can talk to Mr. Kyler. You can talk to your parents. Ask your questions, okay? Because it's the biggest decision you'll ever make. And it'll change your life. And then you'll be able to share your story with anybody who will listen. Amen?